We're going to talk about composition now. I'm giving a webinar in much more detail next Thursday at what time, Jared? What time is that webinar? 12 noon, right? Pacific?
Yep, 12 noon Pacific time.
If you guys have not signed up for it, please do so. Jared will put a link in the chat. Sign up for it because there's a lot to know about composition. I'm not going to get too deep into it because I want you guys to come. I want you to come to the webinar, but it's an ongoing conversation that deserves a lot of information. But let's talk about composition here. So I wrote about it originally in my book, Advancing Your Photography. And I said, here's the deal. It's not a set of rules. There are guidelines that you can follow with your composition. And one of them was really famously written by Edward Weston, amazing photographer. I love his work. He says, to compose a subject well means no more than to see and present it in the strongest manner possible. Strong means powerfully affecting the mind, senses, or emotions. Okay, that's a strategy, isn't it? Make it the strongest way possible. Now, it's a little bit like in sports saying the best way to throw a football is the strongest way possible, or the farthest you can throw it. Don't you? Okay. For me, I got to say, I've read that quote over and over many years, and I go, okay, Edward, how? Isn't that your next thought? Okay, I get it that it should be the strongest way possible. That's a strategy. But tactics means how you do it. How do you do it? We all kind of want to know those answers, don't we? Like, how do you do it? It's like a chef saying you should cook a meal for the strongest response possible, or play music with the strongest emotional impact possible. Yeah, but how do you do that? So it leaves me in asking those questions. I've been asking that question ever since I read that quote from Edward Weston, because if we all knew how to do it the strongest way possible, wouldn't we all have great composition? So there are some answers to that, right? So one of the places I have given some answers is in my composition field guide. If you guys don't have this, you should get it. It's free now, but Jared and I were just talking about how this is going up on Amazon. It's going to be for sale as soon as Jared gets it up, any day practically. So you can grab it for free now. The thing that's cool, this is my iPhone here, and that's where I want it to go, is on your iPhone or your smartphone. It's not meant to be a lot of theory. It's meant to be something you can scroll through to get ideas. How can you make a strong composition? So, for instance, you can look at a photograph like this of the deer. I could have framed it in the landscape. You might think, wow, you're shooting deer, photographing deer, it's going to be stronger to photograph it as a landscape, but I actually felt it was stronger to photograph it as a portrait. And in fact, it is a portrait of a deer. So I put these here to give you ideas. It's just based on the idea of like a recipe book. But you can carry it around with you on your iPhone. Maybe you get stuck. I have found that I believe most photographers deal with about 5 compositional techniques and kind of cycle through those over and over again. I get it. It's like cooking. I have 5 recipes I'm pretty good at. I can make a pretty good omelet. I can make great salads. I'm really good at making salads. I make incredible pesto. It's my signature dish. I can barbecue. The list is now getting shorter. There's probably a 5th one there somewhere. But that's not exactly a big vocabulary of food, right? And composition is so important because if you're going to make it the strongest way possible, you want to have a lot of different techniques, right? I mean, you're not going to just compose it one way over and over and over again. You want to change it up. So it's good to know these things. So you can use this field guide. It's exactly what it's meant. You might think, oh, maybe this is a good time to turn my camera at an angle. Maybe it's a good time to use the points of third. It's not a rule, right? There's no rules here. But maybe this is a good time, especially because I want that zebra. I want my subject to look through the frame. David Smith, who I interviewed, made a big point about when you're photographing an animal, if you do this, it kind of makes the whole, their depth here feel squished. See how much space we have going this way? That way, we have very little space in front, right? But if we turn around this way, all of a sudden, there's space for the animal, or person for that matter, to look into. And that actually can give you that feeling of space. He also says if they're looking down into the frame, leave some space below them. Otherwise, it can feel tight and sort of claustrophobic. Good point. These are tools. You use these tools just like any set of tools. You got to pick the right one. And sometimes you don't know until you take the hammer out. Maybe you don't need a hammer. You can't use a hammer on everything. If you take a screw and start hammering it in, you're not going to like the results. Composition also has to do with geometry. Geometry is a pretty amazing thing because we're surrounded by geometry all the time, but you can take advantage of it and look for geometrical forms, which can be really interesting. So this is what I recommend you guys grab that. I also recommend that you come to my webinar because I'm going to dig down into, so what are some of these tools? Like, how do they work? And what are some of the false or misconceptions that people have about composition? They're there, I guarantee you. Photography is strewn with misconceptions. I know the biggest one. I'm not even going to tell you. Maybe I'll tell you next week. I think I will. I consider there's one huge misconception in photography that is probably the biggest stumbling block. And the reason why, honestly, there's a lot of crashes and burns. You know, a lot of people get into photography and then kind of crash out. Because there's this big misconception right at the get-go. It's like trying to enter a building on the third floor. How successful would you be if I said, the front door is 3 floors up, but there's no staircase, just get up there. Now, if you're a rock climber, maybe you'll figure it out. But most of us don't want to walk in the front door on floor 3. We'd rather come in the front door. And almost every photographer is missing the front door. I will tell you about that next week because it does have to do with composition because it's the whole entry point. Okay, something I wanted to do is pick up one of your photographs from AYP, and let's go to that. I was really impressed by these photographs from our friend Christopher. So I want to talk about 2 of his photographs. Compositionally, what's really interesting is that, first of all, you know, this kid is looking at us, looking right at us. The other subjects are not, so that immediately your eye goes to him, but also his red scarf draws your eye there. Now he's framed between these oars. The oars sort of create a feeling of stability. You know, that's a mood line. They're stabilizing each other. But what's interesting is this line is actually a line of instability. So you've got this sort of kind of motion in one sense of going very stable, but then there's this line going this way, which causes a feeling of instability. And notice how his back is also paralleling this line. That just kind of is another interesting point about this photograph. And then the kid on the back, I think it's a kid, another point of instability because it feels like he could move at any moment and upset this boat. But beyond all those things, I just, it draws me in because of that warm expression. And we're not going to overthink this too much, but this is a really well composed photograph and a very interesting and inviting photograph. So well done, Christopher. I'm going to look at one other one that you posted, skipping over some here. This one, a very interesting photograph. It's really, got two frames here. You've got this is its own complete frame, and this is another frame here. Now, my eye immediately gets drawn to the colors. He's got some sort of a robe on or blanket. Immediately you're drawn to those colors. And his expression. There's a lot going on here that's very interesting. Then we have this sort of set of stairs. You're kind of got a leading line going down if you think about it. This is a series of steps that leads your eye. It helps to lead your eye here. Now, what's also interesting is this symbol, whatever that is right here too. So you've got some points of interest going. What is that symbol? Bob Holmes said, leave your viewer asking questions. Christopher, the only thing I would, if you're a purist, you can, don't let Dan Milliner hear my suggestion here, but I would get rid of this only because it just pulls my eye over. I mean, that's a simple editing thing in Photoshop or Lightroom. It just pulls my eye out of the frame a little bit. For me, that's what I would do. I'd just make this a long stairway here. These other things don't do that because they're pretty blurred out, but it's mainly because there's that color there. And I find for me, it just pulls me away a little bit. Take or leave it. Purists don't have to listen to that advice. It's just my only thought. But, it really is a great photograph, and you are really fortunate to be in these places but you've done this in New York. You're a good photographer. You're finding these amazing photographs. And at the end of the day, guys, that's what it's all about, is you find the photograph. All these tools, visualization, composition, they're all about you finding a story and conveying it to your viewer. That's really the beauty and the art of photography. Or for that matter, any visual art form, whether it's painting or drawing or filmmaking. We're using our tools of composition to forward that message. Like, what do you want to say here? What are you saying to your viewer? You're using your tools of composition to say that. Just like a composition in writing, you're using your tools of language, wording, how you structure your sentences, your emphasis. There's tools in there, and the same thing is true with photography. So, guys, join me next week, okay? I'm going to get into much more depth here. Grab the composition field guide. Come ready. Bring your notebook. It's at 12 noon Pacific. Bring some lunch so you can enjoy it. And we'll have a really great time. Tell your friends, would you please? I really would appreciate if you guys, if you've never said anything to one of your friends, now I'm asking you, please do so. Please bring them to this webinar. Webinar is very different than this broadcast because you guys can interact. We can even open up the microphone. I'm not sure if we will or not, just depending on time. But you guys can definitely, be a part of it and interact. Okay, well, that's it. This is short and sweet today. I want you guys to also think about your questions you might have. And Jared, would you open up a topic in AYP Club about
Yes.
composition questions? Because I'd like to know about those before the webinar so I can plan accordingly. Okay? What are your questions about compositions so we can address them? Okay? Please subscribe and enable the bell so you don't miss any of our new shows. Like the video and please share it and leave your comments. I love hearing from you. And remember to get out and capture your own images of life.